Here's the big question this show answers. How do we leverage technology and human science to positively impact our personal and professional life? The Tech Human Experience has the answer. Here's your host, Inc. 5000 tech founder, neuroscience junkie, and Navy SEAL wannabe, Javier Guerra.
Hello, my fellow tech humans. Today's guest is a business and digital transformation executive, a well-rounded thought leader in bringing together business strategy, operations, and technology. With over 20 years of executive leadership, she's helped sculpt the future of work, driving critical changes across industries, from startups to Fortune 500 organizations. Beyond her profession, she's an advocate for driving meaningful impact, a board member with an eye for innovation, and has a passion for building and leading teams that turn vision into reality. Please welcome Leona Thomas. Thank you for your time today, Leona.
Glad to be here, Javier. Thank you for having me.
Yes, always good talking with you. Let's start off as usual with the stat. So it has to do with sustainability through tech innovations. Technology-driven sustainability initiatives are on the rise, with a 60% increase in startups focusing on eco-friendly solutions and sustainable technologies over the past year. How can technology, in your opinion, how can technology really play a pivotal role in achieving sustainable goals across industries?
So there's a lot of ways that this can happen. One of the most important ones is starting to address some of the areas of needs, and especially as the wave of change has to occur in terms of you have more countries that are starting to move towards middle class, starting to consume more. We're moving towards all of the trying to be more sustainable for things like the EVs and those things, but they're actually having other impacts on what the overall environment is, plus the challenges that you have with just global change, climate change, and what that means in terms of availability for water, demands. And so really being able to look at technology for what it is as a tool for how can you apply it to go to those after those specific problems. How can you look at, there are places where they're doing things like using technology to figure out how to get water out of the air to create water. You've got places and people looking at things like, okay, if we're going to start manufacturing all these new chips, right now we're doing them in areas very often where you need high water usage and you're actually consuming water in areas that are in drought. So what are you going to need to do to help to shift that and optimize that? To start looking at how do you use energy as a whole, right? That's another way to do that. To be able to look at a way to optimize or be able to reduce things around travel with the supply chains. I mean, like it is like any other problem. How do you start to look at and define the problem and then use the technology that's available and or continue to build on what we have to create new to really start to leverage and use our resources differently and be able to determine if there's resources that are going to be short supply, how do we actually remove them for the need to be through the process as a whole. So it really is about looking at what the changes are, what those opportunities are, and looking at things differently, which is a theme you'll probably hear all the way through, because what you really need to do is recognizing change is constant, evolution is constant. But if you just don't look out past that sort of right in front of your face or even that near horizon, you're not going to have time to get to the point that where what you need to be able to get those changes into place. Most technology starts to emerge. When people talk about emerging technology, what they're talking about is emerging commercialization. Emerging technology usually starts 10, 15, 20, almost 50 years prior, but someone had to start to identify and figure out how to solve the problem and then build on what they had coming from others to leverage it for going forward.
Yeah, I love how you said that, how you said, your definition, I guess, of emerging technologies. A lot of people, they don't realize how long things have been around, right? Whether you're talking about, blockchain, AI, cryptology, whatever, right? It's typically until it becomes more user-friendly, so to speak, and popularized or just talked about more. It's kind of just behind the scenes. And it's interesting challenges. It's such a deep topic that we could literally talk all day about, sustainability and industry. And, there's so much having to do with capitalism and, antiquated ways of doing things when there's so many new technologies and ways at our fingertips, but there's so much politics and all kinds of stuff involved in it. I don't really want to go down that path, but it's interesting. It's a deep topic.
Well, I think also hoping that, if you look at things like the Western countries and stuff, we've already made a ton of mistakes in how we got in here. We've overconsumed a lot of resources because they were abundant and they were easy to access, and just because we all assumed they would always be there. How do we make sure that those lessons come through, that we shouldn't be acting like that, not only for the Western countries, but for the evolving countries? You got evolving economies that are going to go through some of those, and hopefully they can jump over and skip some of those steps where we overconsumed, to help be able to be able to build a more sustainable global. This is a global effort, a global need. Everybody has to be able to kick in and do the parts. So it's not only just like maybe not using as much, but it's also teaching people and learning that from the lessons that we've had, to be able to find different paths for going forward.
Yeah, and I don't know. It makes me also think about the dynamic of what's going on right now with like manufacturing, like chip manufacturing is starting to move back to the U.S. I remember probably about 15 years ago, maybe longer, I was on the board of the Greater Chamber, and I was talking with the president, I believe, Marcel, about the fact that we really need to start moving manufacturing back to the U.S. And now, in more recent times, within the past year, I've heard that because of like some of the instability on the global scale, I started doing a little bit of digging as far as like how globalization has been playing out. But realistically, the U.S. was, I believe, I'm not an expert on this, but what I've heard is that the U.S. was really talking about and kind of leading the way in getting countries to kind of start being dependent or trading with other countries on a global scale. But the U.S. never really kind of bought in fully to really kind of become dependent on other countries. And now it's almost, what I'm hearing is there's almost like a deglobalization to where we're bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. and having less dependency on other countries, which if we already have sustainability challenges, that could potentially accelerate some of those challenges, or amplify some of those challenges, I should say. So it's an interesting dynamic of what's going on in the world right now, for sure. And yeah, it's just
Well, it also
it's
reflects that
definitely going
all
to
of
be
these are always
challenging.
pluses. Yeah. No, I say it also reflects that it also shows that everything is a combination of pluses and minuses, right? Because one of the benefits of starting to move things onshore, bring back into the U.S., is that you reduce the amount of fuel, efforts, and things that need to go to be able to ship things from one place to another. It was assumed for a long time that shipping was cheap, and so you would get cheap labor overseas, you get cheap transportation overseas, and then it would come out as being cheaper products that would put things which would allow you to sort of help to take over your market and grow and all those things. But if you look at it now, the cost of fuel is not only going up, but you're going to have some points where we actually at some point in the future need to remove that. How much pollution are we generating by all the stuff that we send from one place to another, to have one part built here, another part built there? Even in terms of looking at people and services and skills, a lot of companies for a long time pushed we're going to offshore to get cheaper labor. Well, that cheaper labor has sort of moved over time, but they didn't factor into the account and the cost of what it takes to have people manage those such distributed teams, and it's really not as effective. So being able to bring more nearshoring is something and onshoring is something that is a movement that's in the process as well. So it's never a single answer. It's a combination. This is all complex. It's a combination of pluses and minuses, and also looking at where you are and how you can take advantage of something at a point in time, because it's going to continue to evolve.
Yeah, yeah, it's such a dynamic pace. We work with some massive companies, Fortune 100s, and it's just like, I was just talking with the president of enterprise supply chain at one of these Fortune 100s we work with the other day, and it is just mind-boggling, to think about like leading an organization at that scale, of the complexities on a global scale, just all over the place with time zones and manufacturing and supplies and personnel and legalities. It's just, yeah, it's definitely an effort. So from, let's talk about a little bit about maybe like a startup. So maybe some of the challenges, could you elaborate maybe a little bit on some of the challenges that maybe a startup would face in scaling sustainable technologies, and maybe how they can overcome the challenges in dealing with this?
So obviously, one challenge that a startup always has is resources, lack of resources, and having to do more with less, just because you are in that stage where you often are investing more in than you are generating revenues to sustain it. And if you're lucky enough to be in an organization where you're generating enough revenues to sustain it, then you don't have to go raise money, and there's a lot of things that go with it, but you still have sort of limited resources compared to some of the larger. That benefit allows you to move faster at times, but it also means that you've got to figure out how to do things differently. And I think it really reinforces, more importantly, understanding how your organization works, and this is important at all scale, all sizes, but really understanding how your organization works and understanding where you can compromise one versus another area to be able to shift resources where you need them to be. Having a really good understanding of your markets, your plans, there is actually a framework for things that every company in business needs to be able to have. I've actually built it out several times, on paper. At some point, I may put it together, but the ability to develop a product and service, to be able to go sell it, the ability to actually take money to exchange for it, the ability to be able to deliver what you just sold, right? Be able to handle banking, taxes, regulations, all of that stuff. Every company has to do in some form. So as a startup, most people don't understand how those different pieces work, and you have smaller numbers of people, and you don't get to specialize as much. So I love that space, in part because you actually have to do the broad set and look at the overall and figure out how the pieces fit together. And you don't have that luxury of being able to become the expert focused on one area. But from a startup perspective, and sustainability is really understanding where can I get those resources in a way that's efficient to me, as well as efficient, hopefully, to what we're using in terms of the overall, global impacts of other areas, and figure out how to understand what those risks are if you're making those trade-offs of saying, well, maybe I'm going to go overseas and get some research from there. Well, what does that mean? I'm going to lose some liabilities and risks with that because my supply chains make it get gunked up along the way, or there may happen or something, and for some reason, whether it's political instability or something, I may have access to resources. And we say stuff like that, and people would look at us like, no, that never happened. And now you look at what's going on right now, like in Ukraine and other things, where all of a sudden you do have those political issues to go through, right? So you really have to look well beyond what most people think about your four walls, and understand what's going on around you, and understand also what your backups are if something goes wrong, particularly as a startup, because you don't have as much buffer and ability to pull resources from other areas, or some ability to sort of wait things out and see if they're going to stabilize. You have to be able to react, and continue to move forward, or you're going to sort of stall out. And as a startup, stalling out is one of the worst things that can happen, because, especially if you think you're going to go do fundraising or something, if you can't prove that ongoing growth or that ongoing progress, people are less likely to go ahead and invest in you. They're not going to, take you for granted. And it's just a lot harder to get it removing and started back, where you sort of fall back and don't have the direction, because there's so much demand on the people who are involved, right? From a day-to-day operations, you're trying to operate and innovate all at the same time.
Yeah, it's building the airplane while it's in the air, right, in mid-flight. And so I totally get that, right, because I've started multiple startups, and I think I went a little bit OCD on the infrastructure of building, specifically, my current company that I'm focusing on. But it was, in my mind, my definition is mainly inspired by Robert Kiyosaki years and years and years ago, was that, he said that, a business is where his definition of business is he can leave for a certain period of time, and when he comes back, the business is stronger than when he left. So I set it in my mind as like, as a startup, I want to build companies that I can take a 6-month vacation, and when I come back, the company's stronger than when I left. So I've like bent over backwards over the years to build the infrastructure, to build the systems, to have just solid ecosystems. And like you said, plan A, plan B, plan C, just in case, but to have the funding, to have the everything in place, to have everything automated for the delivery systems, so that, if we need to ramp up on a dime, we're there and we can compete with very large established organizations. And that, in my mind, it was, we focus and bend over backwards to get those business systems in place, then I won't run myself or my team into the ground as much when, those periods of very busy new business comes in. We can easily scale and not have to worry about necessarily building so much of that airplane in mid-flight. So it's definitely an art, and You have to be in it to really understand it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But
Well, and I think also
it
you
keeps you on your
said it as
toes.
business systems, but I also think what you're also alluding to is the understanding of having good business processes, right? And a good
Yeah,
understanding
yeah,
of how things
exactly.
fit together,
Systems,
because
processes. Yeah,
processes, like, they all have to fit together, they all have to work together, and people have to understand them, right? You have to be able to help to communicate with them. If you and you also have to figure out what that balance is between how do I make sure and try and optimize versus making sure you're not so rigid that you can't change, or it's going to cost a lot to change for that next step of where you're going. And again, this is all, you're right, it's an art, not a science. It's all about, trial. Not, I don't want to use the word trial and error. It's about understanding what the opportunities are, what the pluses and minuses may be, but also having a framework that you can explain to everyone about how things should be working together, to be able to see, like, if I'm going to change this, here are all the 15 different areas that actually have to change to go with it to make that possible. What is it going to take for us to do that? Can we do it? Should we be doing that right now? What else is that pulling away from in the process of trying to sort of jump in and try something new? Are we about to actually undermine something that we really do need to stay and really for our long-term sustainability? Make it as an educated decision, not a, oh my God, what do we just do? Right.
yeah, yeah. Let's dive into today's topic: leading through technology change, visionary strategies for the digital era. In this episode, we'll focus on how to plan for and adapt to global shifts as well as the evolution of technology. We'll delve into strategies for making proactive decisions, choosing the right tech, avoiding unnecessary trends, using diverse data effectively, and overcoming digital transformation challenges. So, Leona, in relation to proactive planning, in the face of rapid tech advancements, how can organizations really adopt a more proactive stance towards strategic planning?
So the first thing, before I start to jump in and answer that, I want to stress something we actually just started to touch on in that icebreaker, right? This is a complex set of changes that have to occur. This is not something that is sort of easy and necessarily straightforward for everybody. It takes some thought. It takes some time to make sure that you understand how things are working, and it also makes sure that as you just said, it's an art, not a science. Its balance is going to change, and it will continue to evolve over time. And if you think that there's a cookie can't cutter answer, you're going to sort of box yourself in, so you actually can't do the proactive planning and the proactive understanding, and also even looking at effective implementation of realizing you have to build a framework and a set of guidelines for your own organization, for where you are, and even for yourself, for where you are and how you want to move forward, and really understand how and understand what impacts, how things are going to impact your organization as you continue to change. Because even if the world around you stood still, the need itself will continue to change as you continue to go forward, right? So when we look at that, there's also a couple base principles I want to help reinforce, because we're going to talk them through. Technology is a tool. How effective that tool is really is about understanding how to apply it, because if you take a tool and you use it right, you can get great impacts, great change. If you take a tool and apply it wrong, you could actually create much more chaos and damage than if you had just left it alone. So really making sure that you actually understand what you're doing, what you're trying to do, and have you chosen the right tools and approaches before you sort of jump in and just start saying, hey, you know what, I see all this great stuff showing up about AI, or hey, Salesforce is the latest great thing from whatever. Is really understanding, does it apply to you? Does it make sense? And is it going to solve a problem that you need and who you are? And or give you an opportunity that makes sense? Or again, is it something you maybe should hold off on and leave it alone for a little bit until you're ready to take advantage of it and use it correctly? So in terms of strategic planning, one of the things I always say to people is strategic planning shouldn't be a one-time thing. It shouldn't be a boom, here all of a sudden we're going to do a strategic plan every year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. We constantly evolve, the organizations constantly evolve, and life constantly evolves. But what you should be doing is looking at how is it that you really start to understand and define sort of a baseline that you start with, understand that organization and who the framework is, and understand how you work as an organization, as a company, so that you know and understand as you start to look outside how things are going to change and impact you. Actually, even look internally as you start to make changes, how things are going to change and impact you, plus, minus, maybe won't change you at all, but that you have a way to be able to work on it and build on it. On several boards and several organizations that we've run, we've had strategic planning reviews every month at times, because there were so many things changing and you knew things were evolving that you needed to adjust and adjust in small bits and not that big bang theory. But if you leave it until it's so outdated, you've got such a big change, you're going to have a really hard time managing that and being able to negotiate for going forward. It's not impossible, but it's a lot harder. The other thing is being proactive, and we even started to talk about things of what are you looking for outside of your own four walls, right? So what are you looking for in terms of what's happening in the economy? What are you looking for in terms of what's happening and changing in the markets that you're playing in? What's happening and changing in the technologies that are evolving that you may be able to use, or maybe looking in other industries. Starting to also look at also the demographics and the needs of the customers and the customer bases that you are both working with now and that you're hoping to work with in the future. Looking at things like what your governments are doing, right? Because if you just look at all the investments over the last couple of years, where are some of those industries now suddenly emerging? You can tie them right back into the federal investments that are going and to some of the regulations that have changed. You mentioned about the supply chains and some of the things you're doing previously. In an earlier life, I actually became an expert on REACH, which was the European chemical regulations that went in around 2008, 2009, and for several years. Those had global impacts for companies that were both importing or exporting in from the EU as well as operating in the EU. It changed entire areas, and if you weren't watching what's going on with the regulations, you actually were going to get caught and be forced off of markets or potentially heavily fined because the Europeans actually enforce their regulations, where the U.S. tends to be a little bit more hands off. And I won't go into the politics of that. I'll put it in there, but really when you start to look at it, theory is also, where are those countries we talked about earlier about, like, what are you doing with supply chains that may be overseas? What's going on from there? What do you need for resources, skills? What are things as things start to shift, where those raw materials may be completely different countries than they were previously, right? There's a whole lot of things going on around you. And if you aren't watching that and keeping an eye out to that proactively, then by the time it comes up on you, you won't have time to adapt and change, and you won't be able to really be ready for it. So it really is putting time and putting practices in your own life so that you're constantly learning and evolving and listening and reading and capturing information so that you can figure out how to bring it back in, not only for your organization, but also for yourself, and figure out where those real risks are and what those real opportunities are, and what's the best way for you to respond. If you aren't doing that and you're only doing it once every X, you're never going to be able to really sort of be able to effectively negotiate those changes that are all continuing to evolve on a regular, ongoing basis.
Yeah, just moving so fast, and it's accelerating, and it's I think it's, I forgot who said it, maybe Wayne Gretzky. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Yeah, but he's that pro hockey player, but he's like talking about skating to where the puck is gonna be, right? But everything is moving so fast, and technology is moving so fast, and regulation is changing, and it's so dynamic. It's a challenge, and not to mention the need to just like transforming the way you're doing things internally from a process perspective, and leveraging technology to really accomplish or move your company forward in the aspect of digital transformation. That being said, what are some common hurdles that companies face in the digital transformation journey that you've seen, and how can they overcome them?
So one of the most common hurdles I see is that people get sort of enamored with the technology and they forget about helping define what it is that they need to do as a business and where they need to go going forward. And so they just jump in and start running before they have any idea where they're trying to run to. I can tell you the number of times I've gotten a call for a rescue, and the first thing I start to walk in is that someone please explain to me what the scope, the objectives, and what the overall plan is for how we're going to put that in. And I just see blank stares. It's like, well, we got this new technology going in, we got these new people going databases, and I go, time out. How is this going to fit into the organization? What is it you're trying to achieve? And the number of times that somebody can't answer that is really high when they're in trouble. So it is a consistent pattern that you see. They just don't stop to think, what is it that we are doing as an organization that's going to make it possible, and sort of think at it beyond just here's what the technology group's going to be, or here's what we're trying to do even with one team, and not looking at what it has an impact to all the teams that they are dependent on or who depend on them, because it is an ecosystem, right? And again, all to the side. So that's one of the things about the hurdles, is they just don't stop and sort of plan it out. And I always say the whiteboard is your friend. right? The closer you can define things on a whiteboard, the closer you can to sort of erasing something that's not right, the less it costs you, and the more, and exponentially, the less it costs you, right? And then the better you can help explain it and communicate it to people and be very clear, pictorially, basic concepts, business understanding, general knowledge, the better everyone can understand. There are areas everybody will be in expertise, but you need that common understanding of what it is you're trying to do, and who and what all the changes are that have to happen to make it possible. And I can say 10 out of 10 times that I've walked into a place that I've been pulled in because it's in trouble or rescue, it has because that type of problems just didn't exist. That type of information just didn't exist. Another one is, we've talked about it a couple of times, which is that pace of change, all the things that are actually changing around you and what's going on. So you think you have a plan for something based on what you know, and then boom, something changes tomorrow, right? And so do you have a framework so that when that boom, something changes tomorrow, the first thing that you can look at is, does it matter or not? Because a lot of times people react to whatever someone thinks is urgent because they've sort of run in and said, hey, we got to deal with this. And if you sit down and map it out, it may not even matter. It may be like, great, it's good to know. We'll keep an eye on it. We're going to keep going with the current plan. But if you don't have a way of being able to describe and understand that or evaluate that, then you end up getting pulled in 1,000 directions, which is, again, when you see the studies of why do transformations fail, those are two of the common things that I've seen happen, that, they're either trying to do too much in too many different directions, you don't have the right set of resources, or really nobody knows exactly where you're trying to go, what you're trying to do, and what that overall big picture needs to look like. And then you can start talking about, do I have the right skills? Do I have the right resources? Do I really understand the opportunities, the market I'm trying to go to? But if you don't start with those two fundamental things about understanding and defining where you're trying to go, and then how you're going to do it, so what has to change to make it possible, and also having a way to be able to understand when something does change, to really be able to evaluate, does it matter or not, or how it matters. If you don't have those two, all those other sort of hurdles people talk about don't matter, because you're in trouble from day one.
Along this same area of discussion, in your experience, would you say that there's like one most critical factor in, an organization successfully overcoming some of these hurdles?
So I think it's a couple things. One is recognizing what I just said. You need to be able to define in a way that everybody understands what it is you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and what needs to change. And the other fourth part of that, which is one that often people miss, even who've been doing transformation, what else is going to be impacted by the change that you have to adjust for or account for? Because if you're changing one area of a company and there are 4 other areas that depend on it, and you only look at the one area of the company for what you're doing for change, those 4 other areas are going to suddenly find out that something didn't work, or they didn't get what they needed, or they can't be able to work with how it's going to work together, and you have to go back and readjust everything. And that again talks to the what happened. Why are we going in the wrong direction? Well, because we weren't all pulling in the same. We're pulling oars in different directions, and all we're going to do is spin in circles or potentially go the wrong way, right? So it is really important that you do that and look at it to understand that. Then the other one really is trying to make sure that you have that constant look and that constant eye of what's going on, and being able to figure out from the how things are changing, things that you're not expecting, where you're going to go, what's going to there, and make sure that you have everybody collectively involved. It should not be yes, the executive level should be setting the direction, but they can't make all the decisions because they don't know all the details, right? Even somebody like me who knows how to come in and map out how the overall works, how does it fit together, what you're going to do, build that bigger plan. You'll see, I will talk to everyone. I will go get input from somebody. And if somebody doesn't see themselves when you're bringing through a picture of this is how it looks like, and they can't do it through, you need to stop and ask them, and determine, does it not really truly not involve you, or do we miss something, right? And also, I think that other thing of humility. Don't think you always know the answer. I love when someone comes in, and I'm using love as sarcastically, when someone comes in and tells me that they know what the problem is before they've been there for not even been there a week. You can't, right? You actually have to take the time. You can put some starting points. There's ways to help bring those problems out quickly so you can help to address them, or even those opportunities out quickly. But if you walk in assuming you know all the answers, you're never going to find them, because you have already decided what the answer is before you actually know what you're trying to solve for. And that is a really key thing that people miss on a regular basis from going forward. Did I
Yeah.
answer the question,
What's
everything
coming
that you
up for
needed
me?
for that, or is it?
Yeah. And what's coming up for me? Thank you. What's coming up for me is that what really stood out was the fact of when you talked about maybe another department or another area getting surprised, right? So if you look at studies, some of the biggest challenges in IT, in businesses in general, if you refer to the Sims study, right, it will show you that for a very long time, even in maybe a decade ago, that IT not being aligned with the business has been a huge problem. And so if, organizations a lot, like we hear this a lot, there's a lot of people and departments and teams operating in silos, and it creates a lot of issues and a lot of waste. And so if organizations aren't really looking at things holistically and they're pushing digital transformation in a certain department, a certain area, and they're not thinking about how is it going to affect the rest of the organization, how is it going to affect HR, how is it going to affect marketing, how is it going to affect executive leadership, how is it going to affect whatever, right?
And then
It
carry
can
that
cause a lot
straight
of
out to how
issues.
does it affect your, yeah. I was saying is also carry that out to how does it affect your customer base? How does it affect your partners that you're working with? How does it affect, like,
Exactly. Yeah.
it is that ecosystem. One of the things that I was very lucky early in life is I did not come up through what people consider a traditional IT route right now. And again, when I started working in technology, those traditional IT routes didn't really exist, right? Like there's a lot of things that were changing. I was very lucky that I started learning how to program in junior high. So I won't tell you how many years ago that was, but it's more than 5, right? Like, but I came up through engineering, manufacturing, and process engineering, and with actually started my career with Digital Equipment Corporation, which a lot of people don't necessarily know now, but they were one of the best engineering companies in the world, period, hands down. And if you look at, there's a lot of things that exist that built off of the concepts that were built and developed by the engineers around DEC, that still exists today. But when they taught me things, I've said them, right? What's one of the most important things? Well, identify what the problem is or the opportunity is before you try and solve it. Because otherwise you're solving the wrong thing and you could actually make it worse or make whatever not working go faster. That doesn't work, right? They talk to me about the importance of process and understanding how processes work and doing that not just from a top down, up, left, right, from every entry point to every possible exit point and all the paths through. It's an important thing about looking at that overall, about making sure you're defining things as a larger organization and how the pieces will fit together. Like these are things that I was taught, luckily, before I even left high school, which again, I now recognize when you get older, you get to realize when you got taught something right. And no matter what the world says, you just know this is right. And it has paid dividends over and over and over again. The importance of making sure that you include adequate testing and validation that things work, not just assuming to push them out. Like these are things that are basic concepts that were taught to me very early that don't exist in every organization. And especially when you're doing transformation, if you don't have types of things like this, again, when you start putting that much change in, the amplification of things not going right, it starts to explode. Right. And then you're firefighting, and that's not where you want to be. Right. I mean, I can fight my way out, but I can honestly say though that every time I've had to fight my way out is because I came in to take care of something that somebody hadn't started before, and I was being pulled in for a rescue. And I always keep reinforcing, if we do these steps up front, where I was talking about how do you define, what your processes are, how do you define what your business architecture should look like, and what do you look like now, so we can understand what changes and what doesn't. How do we make sure that we've got everybody in the ecosystem who are going to be impacted or needed involved so that we can account for what we need from them as part of that planning, right? So even if you have somebody just identified, they don't have anything, just making sure that they know, because they may see something all of a sudden that goes, hey, we didn't know this was coming before, we now do, right? So making sure that ecosystem does exist and you look beyond just like what you think is sort of that immediate impact makes such a difference in that ability to be successful or not. It's just a fundamental thing that often gets overlooked. Like I said, that people too often just start with here's the technology, we're putting it in, and this is where we're going to go, and that just doesn't work.
Yeah, it's a challenge that there's so many shifts and so many responsibilities and so little time, right? Typically, leaders are very taxed for time and wearing multiple hats, so it's definitely a challenge. In the process, it's obviously best to involve people in the process. Can you share any kind of methods that you have experienced really leveraging to truly ensure that team members feel actively engaged and kind of valued during transformation initiatives?
Yeah, and again, like many other things, it's a combination of things, right? Because different people have different needs and also different interests and different understandings. So the very first one, I mentioned it earlier about having a business architecture or understanding. It's really having a very pictorial representation for people about how the organization works today and how it's going to work in the future. So you can collectively start to identify what's going to change, and people can expect whatever impacts may be coming towards them in the process. It is also making sure that you've got a really good communication plan to make sure that everybody who's going to be involved or impacted, even if you think they may not be, but they're at least tangentially close, knows what's going on. So again, that nobody gets surprised, but also so that people can help provide impact and feedback, and also start to get that sense of ownership that this is part of for us. So communicate things like, why are we doing the changes? What are the benefits of this? What are the risks? When you tell everybody everything's going to be rosy and sunny and don't worry about it, people automatically assume that you're hiding something. So be transparent, be able to help communicate what those risks are, and then talk about what you're doing to help address them, or saying, and here's where we need help. Getting to people involved, talk to them about what are they going to need around training, what can they do to help facilitate to move this forward, so that they start to take ownership in what's going on and the changes that are there. In addition to, they don't feel like it's being dictated towards them. This has got to be a collective set. Nobody does transformation alone. Like I said, I've been doing it for over 25 years, and I always hedge to say, I lead them, but you never heard me say I do this on my own, because it's not possible. Unless you're a team of one, you can't know everything that's going on. And if you're a team of one, you're building a new startup and you're evolving, but it's going to happen pretty quickly. Hopefully, you need team two, person 2, 3, 4, and the next steps along the way. But when you really look at how to get them involved, first you have to involve them, right? Like, I don't know, I don't understand. It seems like it's simple, but it's an area that people often overlook. People often wait until we're going to train somebody like the last 3 weeks before go live. And so they don't need to know until the last 3 weeks before go live, except maybe the week before to tell them they've got to change their schedule. If you're doing that, again, you're way too late. They should be up in the early planning sessions. They should be up in the early sets. Now, I get that means, I've managed teams of, 500, 700, global changes all at the same time. You have to have a structure to help to reinforce and coordinate and support at different levels of the organization, at different areas. It can't be from just that top down. You need that collective set of leadership in place to be able to help to communicate it, and also figure out who your advocates are that can help be able to support why you're doing it, what's going on, but also be able to recognize and say, hey, if you do this, you're about to take a bunch of people who've been doing the job the same way for the last 15 years and throw them into stuff they've never seen before. You really think they're going to pick that up in 3 weeks? Maybe we should start working with them maybe 3 months or so ahead of time, even if we're not sure what it is, to at least let them start to see what it is so they can start to get their head around it, and maybe go find some outside resources to find alternatives to show them how things work, or a better understanding of let's help develop the training plans together, or how do we make sure that what you may be saying, you don't want to be part of that change. Well, let's identify who those people are and see if there's a way to keep them in the areas of the business that aren't changing, and then figure out who wants to go to the new, right? This is all part of the how do you customize. And again, it's not simple, it's not easy. I'm not trying to pretend like it's like here, 2 days later we've got the whole training plan, communication plans in place. No, but again, starting with that, how do you build a starting point and a framework, and then evolve it as you go forward to help when people start to identify what the needs are, and how they can do that, and also working together in partnership. So if you've got outside experts that you're coming in to help, they shouldn't just be there working with the executive teams. They should be working hand in hand with the teams that are on the day-to-day, so they understand how things are working and know what's coming, and they're ready when that transition happens to go forward differently.
My viewpoint on this, and I've put a lot of thought into this and done a lot of research and done a lot of training and leading and all kinds of stuff, but it's a very complex situation in the business world right now, and what especially technology leaders are facing and teams are facing. But at the end of the day, it's complex, and it's a moving target. But at the end of the day, if you've leveraged a human science expert, or if you understand, like, humans are fairly predictable. They're different, but there's ways that you can kind of understand them, right? And so, like, human nature is very difficult to change. It's, it's very slow to evolve. And so it's, in a sense, it's like, it's almost mind boggling to me of why, so much change is being driven without proactively getting those people involved. Because if you study team science, if you study human nature, if you study the effects of change on people, you would really see it be, particularly potentially slapping you in the face of like how important it is to proactively get those people involved if you want to have them to be aligned and to be your champions to help you drive that change forward, because you need their help, because they all have expertise that you do not have as a leader. But it so little of the time, or so much of the time, they may wait to the end of the project, like you said, to start kind of involving them more, right? And if they did it way up front, it would be so much more powerful and efficient and effective.
And that change management and change management planning needs to be there right from the very beginning, because it, and also what people need at different points is going to change, right? What you need while you're creating something new, defining something new, even building something new, and getting it set up so that you can actually figure out how you're going to roll it out are different skills than what you need as you start to roll it out and what's there. But all of those require somebody within your organization or somebody you've brought in to work with your organization to do something differently than you have done before. And so when you start talking about change management, it can't be just at the very end of this is what's going to happen once we're done. It's this is what has to change and happen for us to be able to get done, to be done, right? Like to be able to get there. And if we can't get there, then you don't have to worry about what to train somebody at the other end, because there won't be anything to train them on. But really to make sure that you understand what the changes are and they're going to make sense, and that you've accounted for, people are doing their jobs every day. They understand what they can see around them. Some people look up, a few steps before, a few steps after, but you need everybody together to be able to figure out how those pieces fit together. And then having somebody like me help facilitate it, or groups of me help facilitate it, makes it possible to figure out what that big picture looks like and be able to define what it is that things are going to be, so that when you start moving things around, you know what you're moving and what you have to change to address that change.
So in relation to really understanding the needs and driving or making a difference, how do you go about really identifying and addressing like day-to-day needs of team members, and especially around driving change, implementing changes?
So one of the things, and you've heard me say it a couple times, and I will sort of reiterate it, because I love the fact that it brings how the organization works down into something that everybody can understand. That using the business architecture processes and being able to sort of show pictorially and represent how the organization works and fits together, and then being able to use that to drive out descriptions and understandings of what that really means, is a really great tool to be able to help to create a framework, so that when you're showing people what's going on or you're talking to people about what's going to change, that they have a reference, that it doesn't matter where you are in the business, and what type of roles, what type of skills, you have a way that everybody can understand what that is. They may not understand all the details. They may not understand what it means to do one or the other. Like if they change something here, we're going into a new market. Well, now your regulatory team needs to come into place, or those types of things. But they at least can understand what it is you're trying to get to. And when you start to talk to them about like, okay, well, what's it going to look like in the future? You start to identify those areas that will change, right? That you're going to need to change with them, are going to be impacted. And so that again gives you a framework for you to start to identify and build out like, well, here's all it is. So if when you start looking at what someone needs, if part of that change is we are going to now need different types of skills, different types of resources, or we're going to be in a different place than we were before, well, you now can see, well, that area has to change. Now let's go talk to that area and find out what it means to be able to do that. Let's go talk to the experts who may be using and understanding how to use some of the new things, and find out what trainings are available to help train our people, because you've got to train people on what they're going to coming down next. You should not be throwing them to the wolves. I would say, I say should not, because fundamentally I say you can't, but there are some organizations that try it that way. I'm not saying you should, but from a fundamental, if you know and can help identify what those changes are that are going to change what someone needs to do, you can help identify better what their needs are. And if you are involving them, as we talked about just a few minutes ago, they can also help identify what their needs are and whether it's something they think they can do, or help identify what other resources you may need instead, right? And I have more than once had somebody been the person that they thought like is the sort of the lead of this is who we think what they want to do in the future, sort of pull me off to the side because they knew they trusted me, and say, that may be what they want me to do in the future. That's not what I want to do in the future. And as soon as you say that, well, then they're not the right person to push towards that role. So how do you address the fact that that may not be the right spot for them anymore? But also, just as importantly, how do you figure out who is the right person for that spot? Because you still need that spot and that role and those skills to occur. And in some cases, we actually maybe redistributed, existing roles and split them differently, or different teams or stuff, to be able to help address what the new needs are. But by having that framework, having that guidance that shows you what areas that you can spend your time focusing on the areas of need and change and drill down deeply there, and then look at the overall and make sure that the areas that aren't changing are still just going to stay together and work with what the new changes are. But really be able to then focus those. And again, it also helps manage this is so big, nobody really knows what's changing. It's like, well, when you have that framework, you can actually point to things and say, yeah, yes, we do. That area there is changing. Here's the 15 different things that means that that's going to change, right? I mean, I mentioned something. Well, we may have new regulations, or we need new skills, or we now need to go establish us with new marketing to a different customer base, or we need more money to raise for that to be able, because we need to hire people. Like, any of that stuff happens, but again, you can focus that on the areas that you identify that are going to change, and not trying to figure out what may happen for anything, potentially anything. It may happen anywhere. You have that guidance and framework, and again, getting everybody's input so that they can see what's going on and help identify what they know at a much deeper level than anybody will at the overall, to help identify, well, if you're going to change that, maybe we need to now go get a new partner, or we now need to replace an aging system, or we now need to go figure out, are you interested in this topic? We're going to go put you through training tomorrow. Let's go. Right? Like, so those are the types of things to be able to how to address what someone needs on a day-to-day basis, is identifying what those real needs are as a collective, not somebody dictating as an expert on high.
Yeah, yeah. So it's so crucial, good change management practices, and especially because everything's changing. It's changing so fast. Part of our philosophy is like anything that we're doing, anything that we're delivering, we're tacking change management practices onto it with our clients, right? So we've actually created our own framework, but of course inspired by all the best change management methodologies out there. But part of that is communication, and communication is so crucial and such an art form and so complex. People, I think, will just kind of glaze over or just not take it that seriously. But communication is crucial, and it's not as easy as what I think a lot of people think. Or they just think it's simple, but it's not. It's very complex. In your experience, like what communication strategies have like really been proven to be the most effective when dealing with changes?
For me personally, what I found to be most effective through multiple organizations, multiple transformations, is having a multifaceted strategy, because you're going to have different people, different communications, different people who react well in different channels, right? So some of the things may be, first thing is having the big town halls, having people understand, to be able to communicate and talk to people and ask about changes, when you're sort of helping say, this is what we're going to do, this is why we're going to do it, this is what's going on. Other ways are, leveraging some of the communication through email or through webinars so that people understand what's going on. You want to make sure it's two-way communications. You also want to make sure that what you're looking for and understanding is, when you talked about that overall architecture, is communicating the areas that you've already identified that are going to change, what this is going to look like, what you see as to the best, and really help to be very transparent of, this is the best that we know right now. We need your help and input to be able to come in, to be able to figure that out. It's also having regular updates. You can't do a one and done. You can't do one big town hall 1 month and then 3 months later come have another big town hall and have nothing in between. So again, whether it's using newsletters or websites or blogs, those are all tools, right? But it's really more that you have different types of communication coming out to different audiences, different areas, so that you're telling them what they need. And so as part of that overall, like, here's what we're doing for planning, is identifying who those different audiences are. Who are the people, within your organization whose roles are going to change? Who are those people within your client base who may be seeing something that they're not expecting to see in the future, or may have new things available to them that they're not that available for? It's got to be part of that overall plan, from that overall direction, and sort of building out that same way of understanding not only what has to change here's what has to change from an operation perspective, but here's who needs to know and how they need to know it, and what are the different options that we have to be able to say, hey, what's going on, right? Like, if I get an email, I'm getting 1,000 emails. I don't. If all you send something through to me is an email, then chances are it's going to get lost. If I open up and say, hey, here's a town hall, and I happen to mention there's an email in there, you're going to go find it now, right? And so that's building on them together. And then also, if you're looking at things and saying, what am I doing that's proactive versus passive? If you have a website, you're expecting somebody else to go check it. That is passive. Well, what happens if they don't go check it? They don't get the information you need. So how do you actually make sure that not only are you doing like the big town halls, but how are they doing it at a division level? What are they doing at a department level? What are your people sort of, if you're having multiple departments working together, are you pulling them together so they're having regular meetings and activities together so they can share what's going on and be able to pull that together? And making sure that there's someone there that's capable of capturing what's being said and what's going on. So it isn't just a, hey, we said it, now it's gone, and any feedback gets lost, right? So it's got to be a two-way streets, and it's got to be really directed at all the different audiences and people that are involved with tailored messaging for how it's going to impact them. Which you're right, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. And then the transparency of being really honest of what you do know, what you don't know. I've seen things get sunk. Someone promised you're going to have it in 6 months, and they knew it was 3 years out. Well, if it's going to be 3 years out, say it's 3 years out. Say this is what we're going to get you in 6 months, right? Like don't, yeah. That means it's like, yeah, that is your MVP or your trial going out. That's not the solution. If you don't set those expectations right, people see it and they go, this sucks. Why did we put all this time and effort in this? Well, it's usually because it's a first step foundation, and there's a whole lot of stuff like when you build a building that you've dug down deep and built some strong foundations underneath. But if you look at it from just the dirt, the upsale, it looks like nothing's there, right? And so you really have to make sure that you're communicating. We've just built the foundations for the next whatever, and here's what you're going to get, and now we're going to build on it, right? So that's part of the how do you make sure that you do and you keep people current. And when something changes unexpectedly, tell them so that nobody's surprised. It's all about minimizing the amount of surprises and really communicating to the audience that they need for the information that they need and in a way that they'll understand it.
Yeah, it's I'm a big geek when it comes to human science and team science and all this stuff. And specifically Patrick Lencioni is a good team science guy, and there's a framework of like some of the most successful teams in the world, and it's a foundation of trust, right? And that transparency is important, because if people don't if they can't see under the hood and they don't understand why, they don't feel heard. I mean, there's many stages in the cycle, but being heard, or being kept in the loop, the transparency, all that really helps to build trust and to build stakeholder buy-in. And it makes me think about that other saying. I think it's, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? Like, we can't do things by ourselves. When you put people together and you're aligned properly and you're not butting heads and you're actually rowing in the same direction, then you can do way more because of the synergistic effects, right, of the proper collaboration. But to have that proper teamwork and proper collaboration, you really have to have that foundation of trust. And it's so important, and people are so complex. Yet I still say that they're predictable and simple, just because of human behavior, the nervous system, from that perspective, they are, if you understand those things. But everybody's different, and so it's definitely an art and a science kind of combined when it comes to people and leadership. But it's so crucial, and I've seen this years ago, and I believe that it's going to continue to become more and more important in the future. That human perspective, the human science, the emphasis on the human, hence the name Tech Human, right? Like, it's so important, and it's going to continue to get more and more important as everything unfolds. And I think you said something earlier. You may have said it a couple of times that, yes, you can leverage and implement all these technologies, but you may be amplifying the bad within the organization or the teams if you're not taking a step back and thinking about, what are we doing here, right? And how are we doing it? And are we doing it effectively? It's very important.
So I'll actually give an example. I'll give an example. I was actually brought in and working with a catalog retailer at one point in my career. And I came in just as they were putting in a new warehouse system, and they put it in right before peak, which to me is a really bad time to try and do something like that, because, peak is that period of time where they make all their money, and they didn't put it in correctly. And the company was almost bankrupt by the time we got to the end of that peak. So I spent the next 2.5 years helping turn them around and reposition them, because somebody didn't think through the implications of what putting a new warehouse system in that wasn't fully baked would happen right before you were going to sell the largest at the highest revenue generating portion of your year. So it really, again, and I can give you tons of examples of things like that, but it's just really, it's the not thinking through what the overall implications are before you go to jump.
I would not have wanted to be the person leading that charge. Well, not trying to clean it up, but the one that implemented that when it was like the bad timing is a huge part of change. So important. So Leona, we're pretty much coming up on time. In your opinion, what technology does the world need that doesn't exist yet?
We actually alluded to it a little bit at the very beginning. We talked about sustainable, technologies. One of the most important things, one of the most critical path things right now, are technologies to support energy generation and energy storage. We are collectively, as across all countries, consuming energy at a much higher rate than we ever have before. And if you look at things like lithium and other things, that we are going to outpace the resources that even actually exist by everything that everybody's trying to do. So really looking at alternatives for that, whether it is fusion, which will hopefully eventually get to a commercial step, but again, that's at early stage emerging, and also looking at things like renewable batteries or organic-based batteries that aren't lithium-based. And I actually just invested in a company this week out of Delaware that I think it's called Sorberforce, that is actually trying to develop batteries based on salt and other organic efforts that don't require lithium. But whoever gets to that place first is going to make a ton of money. But also they're going to be solving one of the most critical issues that we're all going to have. Because as AI gets to be there, you look at quantum, you look at all the other things that are coming down the pike, all the shipping, like the energy consumption that we have is just growing exponentially across the globe. And we need a way to address that.
Yeah, so huge. And it's going to be interesting to see how the next even 3 to 5 years plays out, because the problems and the pace of change is so fast. It's mind boggling. Thanks for joining us today, Leona. It was really great, talking with you and hearing your insights. Before we close out, I just wanted to kind of touch on, the fact that we both understand that the world is really at a unique crossroads, and we see eye to eye in a lot of things. We're very aligned in kind of what I do and my passion and my company and that kind of stuff. But if we think about the pace of change is accelerating all around us, like a lot in a lot of areas, it's really presenting us with a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities. So you've really chosen to focus pretty much your entire career on helping organizations benefit from these types of changes, and basically proactively helping them to transform who they are for the benefit of themselves and the organization. Can you help the audience really understand the importance of leveraging outside expertise to help them succeed as all these changes unfold?
Yeah, it's really critical. So one of the things I often say is the skills it takes to run your organization on a day-to-day, what you're doing, exactly how your company works. Very often you've trained and come up through an industry, you know exactly how something works and what you're doing. And maybe you've done small evolution or small changes along the way. But the number of people who've actually done major transformations successfully are small. And that's a different skill set than what's needed to run the day-to-day operations. And so there's a lot of overlap, but when you actually go to try and undertake something, being able to blend those two skill sets of knowledge, of understanding of who you are and what your business is and what your industry is, with someone like me who understands how to come in and really understand how to plan out and define these types of transformations, really will give you that leg up and help turn that like 20% success rate versus an 80% plus failure rate you see in all the studies to inverse that, to even hopefully be not only 90 to 100% plus success rates, but being able to achieve much further than you were expecting. And I can say from the years of experience I've seen this over and over again, where if you start with somebody who understands it, you bring a team in who understands it, you're able to help to build that. Whereas you just try and go it on your own, very often I get the phone call that says, hey, somebody's in trouble. And really looking at what do you need to do and be able to grow, and not think that you should have learned it by now, because that's not what your focus and role is, but accept and understand that you really need to build in that expertise of someone who's done it before to help bring that guide and show you the way. And at some point when you're ready, then you can jump off and go on your own. But at least, particularly at the early stages and starting points, of understanding what's going on and how to organize it and strategize with it and really figure out what those impacts are. Those are the keys to getting it done. If you start in the wrong position, you're never going to get there successfully. And so being able to bring people along that can help you make that possible are really a key part of that success.
Yeah, it's, I've, I call myself a personal development junkie, but I've leveraged so many consultants in business, advisors and counselors and programs and you name it. And it's, they're one of my consultants that I hired and worked with for many months. What he, and I don't think it was his saying, but he said that you can't read the label when you're inside the jar. And the bringing in somebody from the outside to kind of challenge you and your thoughts and your perspectives and your strategies is so important. And that's why the best athletes in the world, and the best business people in the world, they leverage coaches, and so it's so crucial. We can only do so much on our own. It's very powerful to triangulate strategies and ideas with outside experts that have other expertise and other experiences that you haven't had yourself, for sure. So thanks again, Leona. Really appreciate your time. Always great talking with you and learning from you. Listeners, be sure to check out her work and follow her on social media. Website links and social handles will be in the show description. Leona, before we close out today, from our conversation today, what's one piece of actionable advice that you want to leave the audience with?
So I would start with really looking at it and saying, how do I start to adopt that evolutionary mindset of truly understanding what's going on and changing around me, and also truly understanding how my company works today, or what companies I'm looking to work today, so that you can understand and identify when those changes happen, to both understand what the impacts may be and hopefully be able to understand and identify what those new opportunities would be before others do, and be able to get out front. But it really is that mindset of really looking at it for what's in the future. And I should have said this earlier, but if anybody wants to reach out and ask questions, I'm happy to have a couple conversations or whatever. If you're looking at something and you're not sure, is this viable? Is this possibly impacting me? That's part of the shared knowledge that we all have to help people understand and see, if it's something that may be viable or something that you're interested in, to be able to look at it and determine if it's something that makes sense for you. But just that ongoing constant learning and awareness of what's going on around you and how it impacts you. So the more you know about yourself, the better you can help judge what that is. The more you know about that outside world, the better you can identify what's changing and where things are going to come from, in that direction.
Yeah, there's so much change and so much information out there. It definitely helps to kind of get different perspective, to weed through it all and kind of narrow that focus in, right? So because there's so much stuff that we can look at and so much opportunity now, it's definitely challenging to get that narrow focus. So it definitely helps. So, Leona, thanks again. Listeners, don't forget to help your fellow tech humans. Share this podcast and follow me on LinkedIn at Javier Guerra 360. See you next time on the Tech Human Experience.
The Tech Human Experience